The sun beat down on the dusty streets of Socorro, New Mexico territory. It was 1868, and the small town square was packed with people. But this wasn't a celebration. This was something much darker. A wooden platform stood in the center of the square, and on it stood several people who had been captured during recent conflicts with Apache tribes. The crowd gathered around, some out of curiosity, others looking to buy workers for their ranches and farms. It was a shameful practice, but in those harsh frontier days, it happened more often than anyone wants to remember. Among those standing on the platform was a young Apache woman. Her name was Nalin, though nobody in that crowd cared to ask. She stood straight despite the pain she was clearly in. Her left side bore fresh scars from a bullet wound that hadn't fully healed. Her dress was torn and dirty from weeks of rough treatment. But her eyes held something the crowd didn't expect. There was no fear in them, only a quiet strength that made some people uncomfortable. The auctioneer was a fat man with a red face, sweating through his shirt in the afternoon heat. He had already sold 3 other captives and was eager to finish his business. When he brought Nalin forward, his tone changed. He knew this one would be harder to sell. "Now here we got an Apache woman," he announced, his voice carrying across the square. "She's young enough, maybe 20 years old. Got some injury to her side, but it's healing up." The crowd stirred, and not in a good way. A rancher near the front laughed out loud. "Injured? What am I supposed to do with damaged goods?" Others joined in the laughter. It was cruel, heartless laughter that echoed off the buildings around the square. These were people who had been hardened by frontier life, who saw other human beings as nothing more than property or problems. "Can she even work?" Another man shouted. "I need someone who can handle a full day's labor, not some crippled Indian." The auctioneer wiped his forehead nervously. "Now, gentlemen, the injury is healing. Give her a few weeks and she'll be fine." "A few weeks?" The first rancher spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "And what do I feed her during those weeks while she's useless? This is a waste of time." More laughter rippled through the crowd. Some people were already turning away, losing interest. The auctioneer's face grew redder. He needed to make this sale and move on. "Let's start the bidding at $50, he said, knowing it was already too high but trying to maintain some dignity in the process. Silence. Not a single hand went up. $40? Still nothing. "Come on, gentlemen. $30? Finally, a voice from the middle of the crowd spoke up. $20. And that's being generous for someone who looks half dead." The crowd laughed again, crueler this time. Nalin stood through it all, her face showing nothing. She had learned long ago not to give her enemies the satisfaction of seeing her pain. Inside, though, something burned. Not shame, but anger at these people who treated human lives like livestock. The auctioneer looked around desperately. "I got 20. Anyone willing to go 25? Nothing." The crowd seemed to have decided that even $20 was too much. At the back of the gathering, a man had been watching in silence. His name was James McAllister, a cowboy who ran a small horse ranch outside of town. He was tall and lean, weathered by years of outdoor work. His hat was pulled low over his eyes, and his face showed nothing of what he was thinking. James had come to town for supplies, not for this. But something about the scene in the square made him stop. Maybe it was the cruelty of the crowd. Maybe it was the way the Apache woman stood with such dignity despite everything. Or maybe it was something deeper, something that reminded him of his own losses. He watched as the auctioneer grew more desperate. $20 going once. This is a steal, folks. $20 going twice. The rancher who had bid $20 was already smirking, thinking he had gotten away with paying almost nothing. He was probably already planning how he would work this woman until she dropped, then discard her if she couldn't keep up. James felt something shift inside him. He thought about his late wife, who had always believed in treating every person with basic human decency. He thought about the kind of man he wanted to be, versus the kind of man this frontier often turned people into. The auctioneer raised his hand, about to bring down the hammer. Sold for $20 to $75. James's voice cut through the air like a knife. The entire square went silent. Heads turned, trying to see who had spoken. The auctioneer's mouth hung open mid-sentence. Even Nalin's eyes shifted toward the back of the crowd, surprised for the first time since she had been brought to this terrible place. James stepped forward, and the crowd parted to let him through. People stared at him like he had lost his mind. $75 was more than twice what healthy, uninjured captives usually sold for. For someone wounded, It was unheard of. The rancher who had bid $20 stepped forward, his face red with anger and confusion. "McAllister, what the hell are you doing? That's more than 3 times my bid." James didn't look at him. His eyes were on the platform, on the young woman who was watching him with a mixture of suspicion and confusion. "I heard the auctioneer," James said quietly. He asked if anyone would bid more. "I'm bidding $75. The crowd erupted in whispers and mutters. Some people thought James had gone crazy. Others wondered if he knew something they didn't. Maybe the woman had some special skill. Maybe there was gold hidden somewhere and she knew where. "This is ridiculous," the angry rancher said. "She's worth $20 at most. You're throwing your money away." James finally looked at him. His eyes were calm but hard. "That's my money to throw, isn't it?" The auctioneer recovered from his shock and decided not to question his good fortune. "I have $75. Anyone want to bid higher?" The wealthy rancher in the crowd, a man named Dutch Hendricks who owned half the county, stepped forward with a nasty grin. Dutch was known for being cruel to his workers and even crueler to anyone who crossed him. He didn't actually want to buy Nolan, but he hated seeing someone like James, a small independent rancher, make a move he didn't understand. $80, Dutch said. His eyes locked on James. The crowd gasped. Now this was getting interesting. James met Dutch's stare without flinching. He knew exactly what Dutch was doing, turning this into a contest of pride and money. Without hesitation, James spoke again. $100. The square exploded in shocked conversation. $100 was an enormous sum, enough to buy 2 good horses or a month's worth of supplies for a family. For an injured Apache woman, it was absolutely insane. Dutch's grin faded. Even he wasn't willing to go that high just to prove a point. He stepped back, shaking his head like James was the biggest fool he had ever seen. The auctioneer could barely contain his excitement. $100. Going once. Going twice. He paused, looking around desperately for any other bidders. Sold to James McAllister for $100. The crowd erupted in a mixture of laughter, shock, and angry muttering. James walked to the platform and counted out the money, handing it to the auctioneer who grabbed it like it might disappear. Legal papers were signed, and just like that, Nolan's fate was tied to this strange cowboy who had paid a fortune for her. As James turned to leave, Nolan was released from the platform. She walked toward him, still limping from her injury, her face a mask of confusion and wariness. She had no idea why this man had done what he did, but she had learned the hard way that when men paid money for you, they expected something in return. The crowd parted again as they walked through, but this time the laughter had changed. It was uncertain now, mixed with something else. People didn't understand what had just happened, and that made them uncomfortable. As they reached the edge of the square, Dutch Hendricks called out one last time. "You just bought yourself a whole lot of trouble, McAllister. That wounded Apache isn't worth half what you paid." James didn't turn around. He just kept walking, with Nolan following a few steps behind, both of them heading toward whatever came next. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty street, and the crowd slowly began to disperse, still talking about the strangest auction they had ever witnessed. Nobody knew it then, but what had just happened in that town square would change more than just 2 lives. It would challenge everything that small frontier town believed about human worth, dignity, and the courage it takes to do what's right when everyone else is doing what's easy. James walked to where his horse and wagon were tied up outside the general store. Nolan followed behind him, keeping her distance. She had learned to read men during her captivity, and this one confused her. He moved without urgency, without the aggressive energy that usually came from men who had just bought another human being. The wagon was simple, loaded with supplies James had purchased earlier that morning. Flour, coffee, nails, rope, and other necessities for ranch life. He loaded a few final items, then turned to Nolan and gestured toward the wagon seat. She didn't move. Her dark eyes studied him carefully, trying to understand what kind of trap this might be. In her experience, kindness from white men always came with a price, and the price was usually paid in suffering. James seemed to understand her hesitation. He didn't push or demand. Instead, he simply climbed onto the wagon seat himself and picked up the reins. "It's about an hour's ride to my ranch," he said quietly. "You can sit up here or in the back with the supplies. Your choice." The words "your choice" struck Nolan as strange. For weeks now, she had no choices about anything. Where she went, what she did, even when she could eat or sleep, had all been decided by others, and now this man was offering her a choice about something as simple as where to sit. She climbed into the back of the wagon, settling herself among the supply sacks where she could keep an eye on him. Her wounded side protested the movement, sending a sharp pain through her ribs, but she showed nothing on her face. James clicked his tongue, and the horse started moving. The wagon rolled down the main street of Socorro, and Nolan could feel eyes watching them from every window and doorway. The whispers would already be spreading through town like wildfire. People would talk about this for weeks. As they left the town behind, the landscape opened up into the kind of country Nolan knew well. Rolling hills covered in tough desert grass, scattered juniper trees, and mountains in the distance. This land looked different from her people's traditional territory, but it spoke the same language of survival. Every plant, every rock formation, every shift in the wind told a story if you knew how to listen. She watched James as he drove, noting everything. The way he held the reins loosely, not fighting the horse, the way his eyes constantly scanned the horizon, the habit of a man who had learned to spot trouble before it arrived, the rifle resting beside him on the seat, within easy reach but not held threateningly. After about 20 minutes of silence, James spoke without turning around. "There's a canteen of water hanging on the side there if you're thirsty." Nolan saw it, a leather-wrapped canteen swaying gently with the wagon's movement. She was thirsty. The auction had lasted hours under the burning sun, and she hadn't been given water since early morning. But accepting anything from this man felt dangerous, like admitting weakness. Still, thirst was thirst. She reached for the canteen and took a long drink. The water was warm but clean. She hung it back where it had been, saying nothing. James nodded slightly as if she had answered a question he hadn't asked out loud. The sun moved across the sky as the wagon rolled on. They passed other ranches, distant buildings that shimmered in the heat. Once they saw another rider in the distance, but he changed direction and rode away. Word had clearly spread fast. James McAllister was now the crazy cowboy who had paid $100 for a wounded Apache woman, and people didn't know what to make of it. Nolan used the time to observe everything about the route. Where the sun was positioned, which way the mountains lay, landmarks she could use to find her way back to town if she needed to, or better yet, to find her way east toward where she thought some of her people might have fled. She had already decided that she would escape as soon as the opportunity presented itself. This man might seem different from the others, but she had learned not to trust appearances. Her thoughts drifted to her family, her village. The memory of that terrible day 6 weeks ago was still fresh, like a wound that wouldn't heal. The cavalry soldiers had come at dawn, giving no warning, no chance to surrender. They said her people had raided a settlement, but Nolan knew that wasn't true. Their small band had been peaceful, trying to survive on increasingly scarce land. She remembered running, trying to reach her younger brother. The sound of gunfire everywhere, the screams, and then the burning pain in her side as a bullet found her. She had fallen, expecting to die there, but some of the soldiers had decided that capturing survivors was more profitable than killing them. So here she was, alive but belonging to a stranger, pulled between gratitude for breath and rage at everything that had been stolen from her. "We're almost there." James's voice pulled her from the dark memories. Ahead, Nolan could see a collection of buildings coming into view. It wasn't a large ranch, nothing like the enormous spreads owned by men like Dutch Hendricks. There was a main house, modest but well built, a barn that had seen better days but was still standing strong, several smaller outbuildings and corrals where horses moved in the afternoon heat. As the wagon approached, 3 men came out of the barn. Ranch hands, Nolan realized, workers who helped James run this place. They all stopped and stared when they saw her in the back of the wagon. One of them, an older man with gray in his beard, walked up to the wagon with a confused expression. "Boss, what in the name of—" "This is Nolan," James interrupted, climbing down from the wagon. "She'll be staying here. She's been injured and needs time to heal." The 3 ranch hands exchanged glances. The older one spoke again. "Boss, can I have a word?" James nodded, and the 2 men walked a short distance away. Their voices were low, but Nolan's hearing was sharp. She caught pieces of their conversation. "Everyone in town is talking, paid $100, and are you out of your mind? Could bring trouble." James's responses were quieter, harder to hear, but his tone was firm. Whatever he said seemed to settle the argument, though the ranch hand still looked uncomfortable. When James returned to the wagon, he gestured for Nalin to follow him. She climbed down carefully, her injured side protesting again. She followed James across the yard toward a small cabin that stood apart from the main house. "This cabin hasn't been used in a while," James said, opening the door. "It needs some cleaning, but it's solid. There's a bed, a stove, and a table. It's yours if you want it." Nalin stepped inside cautiously. The cabin was small, maybe 12 feet by 12 feet, but it was private. There was indeed a bed, simple but with a real mattress. A small wood stove for cooking and heat. A table with 2 chairs. A window that looked out toward the mountains. James went back to the wagon and returned with a bundle. Some blankets. And here. He set down a basket. "Food, bread, some dried meat, apples. There's a well out back for water. If you need anything, the main house is right there." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "The hands will be curious, maybe suspicious. Just ignore them. They'll get used to things. You should rest and let that wound heal properly." Then he was gone, closing the door behind him and leaving Nalin alone for the first time in weeks. She stood in the middle of the small cabin, trying to process what was happening. This man had paid a fortune for her, brought her to his ranch, and then given her privacy and food? It made no sense. Every instinct screamed that this was a trick, that the real purpose would reveal itself soon enough. But as the afternoon light filtered through the window and she sat carefully on the bed, testing it, she allowed herself a moment of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not quite hope, not yet, but maybe the smallest possibility that not every moment ahead would be filled with suffering. Outside, she could hear the sounds of ranch life continuing. Horses neighing, men talking as they worked, the distant sound of a hammer on wood. Normal sounds of normal life, so strange after everything she had been through. Nalin ate some of the bread and meat, her first real meal in longer than she wanted to remember. Then she lay back on the bed, intending to stay alert, to plan her escape, to figure out this strange situation. But exhaustion won. Within minutes, despite all her intentions to remain vigilant, she fell into the first deep sleep she had had since the day her world had been destroyed. For a few hours at least, there were no soldiers, no gunfire, no auction blocks, just darkness and silence and rest. Outside the cabin, James stood on his porch and watched the sun set over the hills. His ranch hands had gone back to work, though he had seen their worried glances. They thought he was crazy, and maybe he was. $100 was money he really couldn't afford to lose. But when he had seen that woman standing on that platform, bearing the crowd's cruelty with such quiet strength, he had seen something that reminded him of what he had lost. His wife would have done the same thing. She had always believed that how you treated people when it cost you something was the real measure of who you were. James had failed that measure too many times since she died. Maybe this was a chance to do better, or maybe the ranch hands were right and he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. Time would tell. But either way, he had made his choice, and James McAllister was not a man who went back on his decisions. The last light faded from the sky, and the stars began to appear. The same stars that had watched over this land for thousands of years. Under those stars, Nalin woke before dawn, her body still trained to wake at the first hint of light. For a confused moment, she didn't know where she was. Then the memories came flooding back. The auction, the strange cowboy, this cabin. She sat up slowly, testing her wounded side. It still hurt, but less than yesterday. That was something. She went to the window and looked out at the ranch coming to life in the early morning. The ranch hands were already moving around, heading to the barn to start their day's work. Her eyes found James walking from the main house toward the corrals. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own space. As she watched, he stopped to examine one of the horses, running his hand along its neck, checking its legs with careful attention. There was a knock at the cabin door. Nalin tensed, backing away from the window. The knock came again, gentle but persistent. "Miss?" A woman's voice, older, speaking English with a heavy accent. "Mr. James, he sent me with breakfast." Nalin opened the door cautiously. Standing there was a Mexican woman in her 50s, round-faced and kind-looking, carrying a covered basket. She smiled when she saw Nalin, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I am Rosa," the woman said. "I cook for the ranch, come 3 times a week. Mr. James say you are hurt, need good food to heal. Here." She held out the basket. Nalin took it, surprised by the weight. When she looked inside, she found fresh tortillas, scrambled eggs, beans, and even some fruit. More food than she could eat in one sitting. Rosa peered at Nalin with concerned eyes. That injury on your side. How bad is it? Nalin's hand instinctively went to her side. She didn't answer, unsure if she should trust this woman. Rosa seemed to understand. I have seen many bullet wounds, child. My husband, he was shot twice before he died. I know how to treat them properly. Would you let me look? There was something in Rosa's voice, a maternal warmth that Nalin hadn't heard in so long. Against her better judgment, she nodded. Rosa came inside and gently helped Nalin lift her torn dress to examine the wound. She made clicking sounds with her tongue as she looked. This has been cleaned, but not well. It could get infected still. You wait here. She left and returned 20 minutes later with another basket, this one filled with clean bandages, a jar of salve that smelled of herbs, and a bottle of something strong that Nalin recognized as alcohol for cleaning wounds. This will hurt, Rosa warned, but it must be done. She was right. It did hurt. Nalin bit down hard, refusing to make a sound as Rosa cleaned the wound properly, applied the salve and wrapped it with fresh bandages. But when it was done, the wound felt better, cleaner somehow. You change this bandage every 2 days, Rosa instructed. I will check on you. And you eat all that food, you understand? You are too thin. Can't heal properly if you don't eat. After Rosa left, Nalin sat at the small table and ate the breakfast. It was good, really good. And she found herself eating more than she had planned. Her body was hungry for nourishment it had been denied for too long. Over the next few days, a pattern developed. Rosa came every morning with food and to check on Nalin's wound. James kept his distance, though sometimes Nalin would catch him watching the cabin from across the yard, as if making sure she was all right. The ranch hands ignored her mostly, uncomfortable with her presence but following James's lead in leaving her alone. On the 4th day, Rosa arrived with someone else. An older Mexican woman, even more weathered than Rosa, carrying a leather bag that rattled with bottles and pouches. This is my aunt, Señora Lucia, Rosa explained. She is a curandera, a healer. Very skilled. Mr. James, he asked her to come look at you. Señora Lucia examined Nalin's wound with expert hands, muttering in Spanish as she worked. Then she made a mixture of herbs and oils, applied it to the wound, and wrapped it with new bandages that had been soaked in something that smelled of sage and other plants Nalin recognized from her own people's medicine. Better now, Señora Lucia said in broken English. The bad spirits, they leave the wound. We'll heal properly now. She left several pouches of herbs with instructions that Rosa translated. Then she looked directly into Nalin's eyes and spoke in Spanish. Rosa translated. She says you have been through much darkness. She sees it in your eyes. But she also sees strength. She says the cowboy who brought you here, he has also known darkness. She says maybe that is why he could see you when others only saw a wounded Apache. He saw a person carrying pain like he does. After they left, Nalin thought about those words. She had been so focused on survival, on staying alert for danger, that she hadn't really looked at James beyond sizing him up as a threat. But now she thought about what she had observed. The way he was always alone even when surrounded by his ranch hands. The way he sometimes stared at the mountains with an expression of deep sadness. The way he treated his horses with gentle patience as if they were the only things he could trust. That afternoon, Nalin felt strong enough to leave the cabin. Her wound was healing well under Señora Lucia's treatment. She walked slowly across the yard toward the corrals, drawn by the sound of horses. James was there, working with a young stallion that seemed nervous and unsettled. He spoke to the horse in a low, calm voice, never raising it even when the horse pulled against the rope or tried to rear up. Nalin watched, impressed despite herself. This was good horsemanship based on patience and understanding rather than force. James noticed her but didn't stop his work. He just nodded slightly in greeting and continued with the horse. After a while, the stallion calmed down, allowing James to approach and touch its neck. This one was beaten by his previous owner, James said quietly, still not looking at Nalin but seeming to know she was listening. Makes him afraid of people. Takes time to teach him that not all humans will hurt him. Nalin understood the parallel he was drawing, and she wasn't sure how she felt about it. But she kept watching. One of the ranch hands, the older one with gray in his beard, walked over. His name was Tom, Nalin had learned. He glanced at her, then spoke to James. Boss, that mare in the far corral, she's acting strange. Won't let anyone near her, James sighed. I'll check on her in a minute. But Nalin had already started walking toward that corral. Something in the description called to her. She reached the fence and looked at the mare, a beautiful brown horse that was indeed acting agitated, pacing back and forth. Without thinking, Nalin began to sing. It was a soft song in Apache, one her mother had taught her, meant to calm frightened animals. The mare's ears pricked up. Nalin kept singing, the ancient words flowing easily despite everything. The mare stopped pacing and turned toward her. Nalin continued the song, adding the clicking sounds her people used with horses. Slowly, the mare approached the fence, her nervousness fading. By the time the song ended, the mare was standing calmly at the fence, allowing Nalin to reach through and touch her nose. Nalin turned and found James and Tom staring at her with expressions of pure surprise. How did you? Tom started, then stopped, shaking his head. James smiled, a real smile that transformed his normally serious face. You know horses. Nalin didn't reply, but something shifted in that moment. She realized that here, with these animals, she had value beyond what any auction block could measure. And maybe, just maybe, that mattered to this strange cowboy who had paid so much for her. That evening, James knocked on her cabin door. When she opened it, he held out a bundle of clothes. These were my wife's, he said simply. She was about your size. That dress you're wearing is falling apart. These might fit better. Before Nalin could respond, he added, She died 2 years ago. Fever took her and our daughter both in the same week. These clothes, they've just been sitting in a trunk. She would have wanted someone to use them. He left before Nalin could say anything. She looked at the clothes, simple dresses but well-made and clean. She ran her fingers over the fabric and felt something crack in the armor she had built around her heart. This man had lost his family, just as she had lost hers. He carried his own wounds, invisible but deep, and yet he was trying in his quiet way to help her heal from hers. That night, as Nalin lay in bed wearing one of the dresses that had belonged to a dead woman she would never meet, she made a decision. She would not run away, not yet. She would stay and see what kind of life might be possible here, in this strange place with this strange, sad man who treated wounded horses and wounded people with the same patient kindness. Outside, under the vast New Mexico sky, James sat on his porch and looked at the stars. For the first time since he had buried his wife and daughter, he felt something other than the hollow ache that had become his constant companion. He felt purpose, fragile and uncertain, but there nonetheless. Rosa had been right when she told him that helping someone else heal might be the only way he could heal himself. He didn't know if it would work. He didn't know if anything would work. But at least now, when he woke up in the morning, there was a reason to face the day beyond simple survival. In their separate spaces, 2 damaged people rested, each carrying their own grief, each beginning to wonder if maybe, just maybe, they didn't have to carry it alone. 2 weeks passed, and Nalin's wound continued to heal under Senora Lucia's expert care. As her body grew stronger, so did her curiosity about the ranch and the man who ran it. She began spending more time around the corrals, watching how James worked with his horses. His approach fascinated her because it was so similar to how her people had always handled horses, with respect and patience rather than dominance and fear. In her world, a horse was a partner, not a slave. James seemed to understand this, even though he had probably never met an Apache who could explain it to him. One morning, James was struggling with a particularly stubborn horse that refused to take a saddle. The animal, a gray gelding, would rear up every time James approached with the saddle blanket. After the 3rd attempt, James stepped back, frustration clear on his face. Nalin had been watching from outside the corral. Without asking permission, she climbed over the fence and walked into the corral. Tom and the other ranch hands who had been watching James work tensed up. But James held up a hand, signaling them to wait and see what she would do. Nalin approached the horse slowly, making no direct eye contact. She hummed softly, a low sound that seemed to come from deep in her chest. The horse's ears swiveled toward her, listening. She moved in a wide circle around him, never approaching directly, just letting him get used to her presence. Then she picked up the saddle blanket that James had dropped and held it out where the horse could see and smell it. She let it flap gently in the breeze, showing the horse that it wasn't a threat. All the while, she kept humming that low, calming sound. After several minutes, she approached the horse from the side. He tensed but didn't rear. She touched his neck, then slowly, very slowly, she laid the blanket across his back. The horse shifted but held still. Nalin stepped back and nodded to James. He approached carefully with the saddle, following the same slow, patient method she had demonstrated. This time the horse accepted it. Tom let out a low whistle. "I'll be damned." James turned to Nalin with respect in his eyes. "Could you teach me that?" Over the next few weeks, an unspoken apprenticeship developed. Nalin showed James techniques her people had used for generations. How to read a horse's body language, how to use specific sounds and movements to communicate, how to work with a horse's nature instead of against it. In return, James shared his knowledge of ranching, of breeding horses for different purposes, of the business side of running a ranch. He taught her English words she didn't know, pointing to things around the ranch and saying their names until she repeated them correctly. The ranch hands slowly got used to Nalin's presence. Tom, the oldest, was the first to warm up to her. One day when she successfully calmed a mare that had been anxious about an injury, he nodded his approval. "You got a gift with horses, that's for certain," he said. It was the first time any of the ranch hands had spoken directly to her. Rosa continued to bring meals and had taken it upon herself to teach Nalin more English, sitting with her in the cabin and pointing to objects, acting out verbs, laughing when they both got frustrated with the confusion of language barriers. One evening, about a month after Nalin had arrived, James invited her to eat dinner at the main house instead of alone in her cabin. She was hesitant, but her curiosity won out. The house was simple inside but comfortable. What struck Nalin most were the photographs on the walls and shelves. A beautiful young woman with kind eyes, a little girl, maybe 5 years old, laughing at something beyond the camera's view. James with both of them, his face younger and full of a happiness that was absent now. James noticed her looking. "That's my wife, Catherine. And that's our daughter, Lily. Like I told you, fever took them both. It was fast, at least. They didn't suffer long." He set 2 plates on the table, simple food but plenty of it. As they ate, James began to talk as if something inside him had been waiting for permission to speak. "Catherine always wanted to help people," he said, staring at his food. "Whenever someone in town was sick or struggling, she'd be the first one there with a meal or whatever they needed. Drove me crazy sometimes how much she gave away. But that was just who she was." He paused, then continued. "After they died, I stopped going to town much. Stopped talking to people. The ranch hands, they work for me, but I don't really know them. Not anymore. I just sort of shut down, I guess." Nalin understood that feeling all too well. She had shut down too after watching her family die after being captured and sold. It was easier than feeling everything. "When I saw you at that auction," James continued, "standing there while those people laughed and made you into a joke, I saw something I recognized. Someone who had been through hell but refused to break. Catherine would have bid on you in a heartbeat. She would have made me do it even if I was too scared or too worried about the money." He finally looked up at Nalin. "I'm not saying I'm some kind of hero or good person. I'm just saying that for the first time in 2 years I did something that felt right. Even if it was crazy. Even if everyone thinks I've lost my mind." Nalin had been listening carefully, processing every word. Now she spoke, her English still halting but improving. "My family, they die too. Soldiers come to village, kill everyone. My brother, he was 12. My mother, she tried to protect us. They shoot her first." It was the most she had said about what happened. James listened without interrupting, without the pity she had seen in Rosa's eyes when hints of her story had come out. "I am angry," Nalin continued, "every day angry. At soldiers. At people who sell me like horse, at everything." She struggled to find the words. "But you pay much money. You give food, medicine, place to sleep. You not hurt me. I not understand why." James was quiet for a long moment. "I don't fully understand it myself. But maybe we both needed something to care about besides our own pain. Maybe that's reason enough." They finished the meal in comfortable silence. When Nalin returned to her cabin that night, something had changed. The walls between them had thinned, not disappeared, but less solid than before. The next day, James asked Nalin if she would help him train a group of young horses he planned to sell in the spring. It wasn't an order, it was a question. He was asking for her help, acknowledging her skill. She agreed. They fell into a routine. Mornings were spent working with the horses. Nalin's methods were gentle but effective, and the horses responded to her in ways that amazed even Tom. who had been working with horses for 40 years. Afternoons, Nalin would practice her English with Rosa or help with other tasks around the ranch. She learned to mend fences, to recognize which horses needed extra feed, to understand the rhythm of ranch life. Evenings, sometimes she and James would sit on his porch and talk, not always about deep things, sometimes just about the horses or the weather or stories from their different lives. James learned about Apache traditions, about how her people lived in harmony with the land. Nalin learned about frontier life, about the struggles of keeping a small ranch running when bigger operations were always trying to squeeze you out. One evening, Tom joined them on the porch, something he had never done before. He sat down on the steps and said, "Miss Nalin, I owe you an apology. When the boss brought you here, I thought he was making a mistake. Thought you'd be trouble or useless or both. I was wrong. You know more about horses than any 3 men I've met, and you work harder than most. So I'm sorry for judging you before I knew you." Nalin nodded, accepting the apology with dignity. It meant something, coming from Tom. Word began to spread about James's ranch and the Apache woman who could work magic with difficult horses. A few neighboring ranchers, swallowing their pride and their prejudice, came by to ask for help with problem horses. James always made sure Nalin was paid fairly for her work, giving her coins that she carefully saved in a jar hidden in her cabin. She wasn't sure what she was saving for yet. Freedom, maybe, or a future she couldn't quite imagine but was beginning to think might be possible. 2 months after the auction, on a cool autumn evening, Nalin stood by the corral watching the sun set over the hills. James came to stand beside her. "You know you're free to leave whenever you want," he said quietly. "I mean, legally, the papers say otherwise, but far as I'm concerned, you're free. Always have been. If you want to try to find your people, I'll give you supplies, a horse, whatever you need." Nalin had thought about leaving many times in those early days. But now, looking around at the ranch, at the horses she had helped train, at the life that was slowly forming here, she realized something surprising. She didn't want to leave. "Not yet, my people," she said slowly. "They are scattered, maybe dead. I have no way to find them. Here I have work. I have purpose and," she struggled with the words, "and I have something like home again. Not same as before, but something." James nodded, understanding. "Then stay, not as my property, as my partner. We'll work these horses together, build this ranch into something good. Equal partners. What do you say?" He held out his hand, offering a handshake, the frontier way of sealing a deal. Nalin looked at his hand, at his face, at the earnest hope in his eyes. Then she reached out and shook his hand, firm and sure. "Partners," she agreed. From the barn, Tom watched the handshake and smiled. He had been wrong about a lot of things, he realized. Wrong to judge, wrong to assume. The fragile peace at the ranch lasted through autumn and into early winter. The partnership between James and Nalin proved more successful than either had expected. The horses they trained together sold for good prices, and word spread about the quality of stock coming from the McAllister ranch. But not everyone in Socorro was happy about James's arrangement with Nalin. It started with small things. When James went to town for supplies, some shop owners suddenly had nothing in stock, though he could see the goods sitting right there on the shelves. Other times, people who had been friendly for years would cross the street rather than greet him. The whispers followed him everywhere. "Indian lover," someone muttered as he walked past. "Treating that Apache like she's people," another voice said with disgust. James ignored it all as best he could. He had never cared much about what people thought, especially after losing Catherine and Lily. What did gossip matter compared to real loss? But the trouble was just beginning. Dutch Hendricks, the wealthy rancher who had briefly bid against James at the auction, had been stewing over the situation for months. It bothered him that a small operator like James was succeeding, and it bothered him even more that James was doing it with help from an Apache woman. Dutch saw it as an insult to the natural order of things, a challenge to the way he believed the world should work. Dutch owned half the town and had the ear of most of the important men in the territory. He began a campaign of quiet pressure. He suggested to the bank that maybe James's credit wasn't so good anymore. He told other ranchers that buying horses from James was practically supporting the Apache cause. He spread rumors that Nalin was dangerous, that she was probably scouting for war parties, that James was being fooled by a clever savage. The first real trouble came on a cold December morning. Tom rode back to the ranch looking shaken, his face pale. "Boss, we got a problem," he said, climbing down from his horse. "I was in town getting supplies, and Dutch's men, they cornered me outside the general store. Said we better watch ourselves. Said the town doesn't take kindly to Apache lovers." James's jaw tightened. "They threaten you?" "Not directly, but the meaning was clear enough." "Boss, I'm worried. Dutch has a lot of men who'll do whatever he says. And a lot of folks in town, they're scared of him." Nolan had been working nearby and heard the conversation. She walked over, her face serious. "This is because of me. I should leave. I bring trouble to you." "No," James said firmly. "You're not going anywhere. This is Dutch being Dutch. He can't stand seeing someone succeed without his permission." But Tom shook his head. "It's more than just Dutch this time, boss. There's real anger in town. Some folks are saying that having an Apache living free on a ranch, working like a regular person, it sets a bad example. They're worried other Indians might get ideas about being treated like equals." The words hung in the air, ugly but honest. This wasn't just about Dutch's wounded pride or business rivalry. This was about something deeper and more dangerous, the fear and hatred that had built up through years of conflict and bloodshed on both sides. That evening, 3 riders appeared on the road to the ranch. James recognized them. Local men who worked for Dutch. They stopped at the gate, not coming closer, but their message was clear just by being there. "We're being watched," Tom said quietly. Over the next week, the pressure increased. Someone cut a section of fence, letting several horses out onto the open range. It took 2 days to round them all up. Supplies James had ordered from town mysteriously never arrived. The bank sent a letter saying his loan terms were being reconsidered. Through it all, Nayland remained calm on the outside, but James could see the worry in her eyes. She knew what angry mobs could do. She had lived through one attack already. She didn't want to see James suffer because of her. One night she came to the main house and found James sitting at his table, going over his account books with a troubled expression. "How bad?" she asked simply. James looked up. "Bad enough. The bank is putting pressure on me. If I can't pay my loan by spring, they'll take the ranch. And with Dutch turning everyone against us, I can't sell horses at the prices I need." "Then I go," Nayland said. "You tell everyone I ran away. Things get better for you." "No," James said, his voice hard. "I told you before, you're free. But if you leave, it needs to be because you want to, not because scared men are bullying us. I won't give Dutch that satisfaction." "This is not about satisfaction," Nayland argued, her English much improved now. "This is about survival. Your survival. I know what happens when angry white men decide someone crossed a line. They come with guns and torches, and they don't stop until everything is destroyed." James stood up and walked to the window, staring out into the darkness. Catherine always used to say that the easy thing and the right thing are usually different. The easy thing would be to send you away, to bow to pressure, to go back to how things were before. But Catherine also said that every time a good person chooses the easy thing over the right thing, the world gets a little bit darker. He turned back to Nayland. "I'm not asking you to stay. That's your choice. But I need you to know that if you do stay, I'll stand by you, whatever comes." Before Nayland could respond, they heard horses outside. Many horses. James grabbed his rifle and went to the door. Tom and the other ranch hands came running from the bunkhouse. In the yard, illuminated by torchlight, sat Dutch Hendricks and about 15 men. All armed, all watching the house with hostile eyes. James stepped onto the porch, rifle held loosely but ready. "Dutch, this is private property. State your business or leave." Dutch sat tall in his saddle, a smug smile on his face. "Just came by for a friendly talk, McAllister. See? The decent folks of Socorro have been discussing your situation. Having an Apache living free on your land, eating at your table, working alongside white men like she's an equal. It doesn't sit right. What doesn't sit right is you riding onto my property with armed men in the middle of the night." James replied coolly. "That seems more like a threat than a friendly talk." "Call it whatever you want," Dutch said, his smile fading. "But here's how it is. You send that Indian packing by the end of the week, and maybe the bank decides to extend your loan after all. Maybe your business starts picking up again. Maybe folks in town remember they actually like you. And if I don't?" Dutch shrugged. "Then things get harder. A lot harder. Accidents happen on ranches. Horses go missing. Buildings catch fire. Would be a shame if anything happened to this nice property of yours. The threat was clear and unambiguous. Tom and the other ranch hands had gathered behind James now, showing solidarity but clearly nervous. They were outnumbered and outgunned. James felt his anger rising but kept his voice level. I paid for Nolan fair and square according to your laws. She works here because she chooses to. She's free to leave whenever she wants, but I won't force her out to satisfy your need to control everyone and everything in this county. You're making a mistake, Dutch warned. A big one. I'm trying to help you here, McAllister. Don't be stupid. I think you and your men should leave now, James said quietly, before this friendly talk turns into something else. For a long moment, the two groups faced each other in tense silence. Finally, Dutch pulled his horse around. You got until Sunday, he called back. Make the smart choice, McAllister. For your own sake. Then they rode off, leaving dust and tension in their wake. Tom let out a long breath. Boss, maybe we should think about— No, James interrupted. I know what you're going to say, and the answer is no. I'm not letting Dutch dictate how I run my ranch or who I work with. Back in her cabin, Nolan had watched the whole confrontation from her window. Her hands were shaking, not from fear for herself, but from fear for James and the ranch hands who had shown her kindness. She knew how this story usually ended. The powerful men got what they wanted, and everyone else suffered. She made a decision then. She would leave before Sunday, before Dutch could make good on his threats. She would pack her few belongings, take one of the horses she had trained, and disappear into the territory. Maybe she would find other Apache survivors. Maybe she would just keep moving, always moving, never staying long enough to cause trouble for anyone. It was the only way to keep James safe. He had given her so much, more than she could ever repay. The least she could do was remove herself before his stubbornness destroyed everything he had worked for. She began to pack, moving quietly in the darkness, her heart heavy with a sadness she hadn't expected to feel. This place had become something like home. These people, especially James, had become something like family. But she had learned the hard way that attachment only led to loss. Better to leave on her own terms than to stay and watch another place she cared about burn to the ground. Outside, James sat on his porch long after everyone else had gone to sleep. He knew Nolan would try to leave. He had seen it in her eyes during the confrontation. She would sacrifice herself to protect him, just as he would do the same for her. But he wasn't going to let that happen. He had made a promise, shook her hand as an equal partner. James McAllister kept his promises, even when it cost him everything. He just had to figure out how to survive until Sunday with his ranch, his principles, and his partner intact. In the dark of the New Mexico night, Friday morning came cold and gray. Nolan had packed everything she owned into a small bundle. She planned to leave that night under cover of darkness before anyone could stop her. She had already picked out the horse she would take, a strong mare she had trained herself. But when she went to the corrals that morning, she found James already there, working with that same mare. Good horse, he said without looking at her. Strong, fast, smart. She'd carry someone a long way if they needed to travel. Nolan said nothing. He knew. Of course he knew. James finally turned to face her. I figured you'd try to leave. Can't say I blame you. Running makes sense. It's the smart thing, the safe thing. Then you understand why I must go. Understanding and agreeing are different things, James replied. He walked closer, his expression serious. You leave, Dutch wins. He learns that all he has to do is threaten someone and they'll fold. Then he uses that same method on the next person, and the next. Where does it end? It ends with you keeping your ranch, Nolan said. It ends with you not getting hurt because of me. It ends with me being a coward, James corrected. It ends with me proving that I'm exactly like everyone else, that I only do the right thing when it's convenient and safe. Is that the man you want to leave behind? Nolan felt tears prick her eyes, a rare show of emotion. I do not want to leave you at all, but I also do not want to watch you die for me. I have seen enough death. James stepped closer and did something unexpected. He put his hand on her shoulder, a gesture of comfort and solidarity. Then don't leave. Stay and fight with me. Not with guns, though we might need those too. But fight by refusing to give in, by standing our ground, by showing Dutch and everyone else that some things matter more than fear. You could lose everything, Nalin said quietly. I already lost everything that truly mattered 2 years ago, James replied. This ranch, the horses, even my own life, they're just things. But having a reason to wake up in the morning, having someone to stand beside, having a purpose beyond just surviving, that's worth fighting for. You gave me that back. I won't let Dutch take it away. Before Nalin could respond, Tom came running from the main house. Boss, riders coming. A lot of them. James and Nalin exchanged glances, then ran toward the house. From the porch, they could see dust rising from the road. Not just a few riders this time. Many. Get the rifles, James ordered Tom. But nobody shoots unless I say so. Understood? Tom nodded and ran to get the weapons. The other ranch hands gathered on the porch, their faces pale but determined. As the riders got closer, James realized something surprising. Yes, Dutch was leading the group, but not all the riders were his men. Some were townspeople, and they didn't all look hostile. The group stopped at the gate. Dutch sat at the front, his face twisted with anger. But behind him, the crowd seemed less unified than James had expected. It's Sunday, McAllister, Dutch called out. Time's up. You going to do the right thing, or do we have to do it for you? James stepped to the edge of the porch, rifle in hand but pointed down. Define the right thing, Dutch. You know what I mean. Send the Apache away, back to wherever her kind belongs. This is a white man's territory, and we don't need Indians living among us like they're equals. But before James could respond, another voice spoke up. It was Rosa pushing through the crowd on horseback, her face flushed with anger. Dutch Hendricks, you are a fool and a bully, she said loudly in her accented English. That woman, she is good person. She helped my family when my son was sick. She give us money from her own wages. She never hurt anyone. Dutch turned in his saddle. Rosa, this doesn't concern you. It concern everyone who has heart and brain, Rosa shot back. You just hate because she is different, because she is Apache, but she is also human being, same as you and me. Another voice joined in. An older shopkeeper from town named Mr. Chen who ran the general store. Dutch, you've been pressuring all of us to come here today, but I don't think everyone agrees with you. Some murmurs of agreement came from the crowd. Dutch's face reddened. This wasn't going the way he planned. Then Senora Lucia pushed forward on her mule, the old healer who had treated Nalin's wound. She spoke in rapid Spanish, and Rosa translated loudly. She says that any man who would destroy another man's livelihood over prejudice is not a man of honor. She says her people have also been treated badly by those who fear what is different. She says she stands with James and Nalin. More voices started speaking up. Not everyone, but enough to matter. A Mexican farmer whose horse Nalin had healed, a widow whose son worked at James's ranch, even one of the deputies from town, looking uncomfortable but speaking anyway. Dutch, I don't think there's any law being broken here, the deputy said. McAllister bought that woman legal. How he runs his ranch is his business. Dutch's face was now bright red with fury. He hadn't expected resistance. You're all fools. We're trying to maintain order here to keep the natural way of things. The natural way? James finally spoke up, his voice carrying across the yard. You mean the way where you decide how everyone else lives? Where you threaten anyone who doesn't bow to your will? Where you use fear to control people? He stepped down from the porch, walking toward the fence, still holding his rifle but not threateningly. I'm going to tell you all something. When my wife and daughter died, I wanted to die too. I stopped caring about anything. This ranch, this life, it all felt empty. His voice grew stronger. Then I saw Nalin at that auction. I saw how you all treated her, laughed at her, made her into a joke. And I saw how she refused to break, how she stood there with more dignity than anyone in that crowd. In that moment, I remembered something my wife always said. She said the measure of a person isn't what they do when it's easy, but what they do when it's hard. He looked directly at Dutch. Sending Nalin away would be easy. Giving in to your threats would be easy. But it would also make me less than the man my wife believed I could be. So here's my answer. No. Nalin stays. She's my partner, my friend, and she's earned every right to be here. If you want to take this ranch from me, you'll have to do it by force in front of all these witnesses. And everyone here will know that you destroyed a man not because he broke any law, but because he refused to hate on command." The silence that followed was heavy. Dutch looked around at the crowd, seeing the doubt on many faces. Some of his own men looked uncomfortable now. Tom stepped forward, standing beside James. "The boss is right. Nolan's never done anything but work hard and treat people fair. I was wrong to judge her at first, but I'm not wrong now. I stand with them." The other ranch hands moved to stand beside Tom, a small line of solidarity. Then Rosa dismounted and walked to stand with them. "I stand with them too." Senora Lucia, despite her age, climbed down from her mule and joined the line. Mr. Chen hesitated, then dismounted as well. "I'm tired of being afraid of you, Dutch. I stand with them." One by one, a few others from the crowd joined the line. Not everyone, not even half, but enough. Enough to show that Dutch didn't speak for the whole town. Enough to show that fear and hatred weren't the only options. Nolan watched from the porch, stunned. These people, most of whom barely knew her, were putting themselves at risk to stand beside her. She felt something break inside her, the last wall of ice around her heart cracking and falling away. She walked down from the porch and stood beside James. "I am Nalan of the Mescalero Apache," she said in clear English, her voice strong. "My people were killed by soldiers. I was sold like an animal. But this man, James McAllister, he showed me that not all white men are the same. He showed me kindness when I expected cruelty. He gave me purpose when I had none. I will not run because of threats. I will stand here on this land, and I will work honestly, and I will harm no one. And if anyone tries to force me to leave, they will have to answer for why they fear one woman so much." The power of her words rippled through the crowd. Even some of Dutch's men looked affected. Dutch realized he was losing control of the situation. "This isn't over," he snarled. "You're all making a mistake." "Maybe," James said calmly. "But it's our mistake to make. This is still America, last I checked. A man can still choose his own friends and run his own ranch without your permission." Dutch glared at everyone who had broken ranks with him, memorizing faces. Then he yanked his horse around and galloped away. About half the crowd followed him, but the other half stayed, some looking ashamed, others looking relieved. The deputy came forward. "For what it's worth, McAllister, you are right to stand your ground. Dutch has been acting like he owns this whole territory. It's about time someone reminded him he doesn't." As the crowd slowly dispersed, those who had stood in solidarity came forward to shake James's hand, to nod respectfully to Nalan. It wasn't a complete victory. Dutch still had power, still had money, still had the ability to cause trouble, but something had shifted. When everyone had finally left, Tom let out a long breath. "Well, that was either the bravest or stupidest thing we've ever done." "Probably both," James agreed with a slight smile. Nalan stood quietly, still processing what had happened. These people, strangers really, had stood beside her. They had risked Dutch's anger to defend her right to exist, to work, to live as a human being rather than as property. Winter passed into spring and the ranch slowly found its rhythm again. Dutch kept his distance, but everyone knew he was still out there, still angry, still looking for an opportunity to strike back. For now, though, an uneasy peace held. The confrontation at the ranch had changed things in town. Some people still avoided James and refused to do business with him. But others, inspired by those who had stood up to Dutch, began to treat him and Nalan with a new respect. It wasn't acceptance exactly, not yet, but it was a start. Rosa continued to visit regularly, bringing food and news from town. She had become something of a bridge between the ranch and the Mexican community in Socorro, many of whom had their own experiences with prejudice and understood what Nalan faced. One morning in late March, Rosa arrived with unexpected news. She found James and Nalan working together in the corral, training a particularly stubborn young stallion. "James, Nalan, I have something to tell you," Rosa called out, her face serious. They walked over to the fence where she waited. Rosa looked around to make sure no one else was listening, then spoke quietly. "My cousin, he works at the courthouse. He told me something important. Dutch has been trying to find legal ways to take your ranch. He talked to the judge about your loan, about trying to force a foreclosure. James's jaw tightened. I figured he would try something. But there is more, Rosa continued. The judge, he is not Dutch's friend like everyone thinks. He does not like how Dutch tries to control everything. My cousin says the judge has been looking at the papers from when you bought Nalin. Nalin tensed. What does that mean? Rosa smiled slightly. It means the judge thinks maybe those papers are not. How do you say, not right? The selling of captured people, it is supposed to have certain rules, certain protections. The judge thinks maybe those rules were not followed. James understood immediately. If the sale wasn't legal, then Nalin was never legally your property to begin with, Rosa finished. She has been free this whole time in the eyes of the law. The three of them stood in stunned silence. Finally, Nalin spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Free? My cousin says the judge wants to see you both. He is going to issue papers that say the original sale was invalid. That means Nalin is officially a free person, with rights like anyone else. James felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't realized he was carrying. All this time he had been protecting Nalin under the legal fiction that she was his property. Now she could be free in reality, not just in principle. When does he want to see us? James asked. Tomorrow morning. But be careful. Dutch has spies everywhere. If he finds out about this before the papers are signed, he might try to stop it. That night, James couldn't sleep. He sat on his porch thinking about what freedom would mean for Nalin. Would she stay, or would she finally leave to search for her people? He had no claim on her, no right to ask her to remain. If she wanted to go, he would have to let her, no matter how much it hurt. In her cabin, Nalin was having similar thoughts. Freedom had been her dream for so long, the thing that kept her going through the darkest times. But now that it was within reach, she felt confused. Where would she go? What would she do? The Apache way of life she had known was gone, destroyed by years of war and displacement. She had no family left that she knew of, no village to return to. But she did have this place, this ranch, these people who had stood beside her, James, who had given her back her dignity, Tom and the ranch hands who had gone from suspicion to respect, Rosa and Senora Lucia, who had shown her that kindness could cross cultural boundaries. Was it possible that freedom didn't mean leaving? That it meant choosing to stay, but on her own terms? The next morning, James and Nalin rode into town together. They went straight to the courthouse, avoiding the main street where Dutch's men might spot them. The judge, an older man with kind eyes and a stern demeanor, welcomed them into his office. Mr. McAllister, Miss Nalin, he began, gesturing for them to sit. I've been reviewing the circumstances of the sale that took place last summer. I have some concerns about its legality. He pulled out a stack of papers. The territorial law regarding the sale of captives requires certain conditions to be met. The captive must be given an opportunity to speak on their own behalf. They must be informed of their rights. The sale must be witnessed and properly documented. None of these things happened at the auction where you were sold, Miss Nalin. He looked directly at her. In my judgment, that sale was invalid from the start, which means legally, you were never Mr. McAllister's property. You have been a free person all along. He signed several documents with a flourish, then stamped them with his official seal. These papers declare you a free citizen of this territory, with all rights and protections that status provides. You can own property, enter into contracts, and seek legal remedy if anyone tries to harm you. Nalin took the papers with shaking hands. I am free? You are free, the judge confirmed. You have been since the moment that a legal sale took place. Mr. McAllister, I commend you for treating Miss Nalin with respect and dignity, but you should know that legally, she has owed you nothing this whole time. James nodded slowly. I understand, Your Honor. The judge leaned back in his chair. Now, I'll be honest with you both. There are people in this territory who won't like this decision. Dutch Hendricks in particular. He's been pressuring me to rule against you, but the law is the law, and I won't bend it to satisfy one man's prejudices. He stood up and shook both their hands. Be careful going home. Dutch has eyes everywhere, and he won't take this well. As they left the courthouse, Nalin clutched the freedom papers against her chest. The words on them were just ink and paper, but they represented something she thought she would never have again. Choice. Agency. The right to determine her own path. They rode back to the ranch in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived, Tom and the other ranch hands were waiting anxiously. "Well?" Tom asked. "What happened?" James dismounted and helped Nayland down. "Nalin is officially free." The judge declared the original sale invalid. Tom broke into a wide grin. "Well, that's wonderful news. Congratulations, Miss Nayland." The other ranch hands added their congratulations, genuine happiness on their faces. But Nalin noticed James had grown quiet, distant even. After the celebration died down and everyone went back to work, she found him in the barn checking on the horses. "James," she said softly. "Why are you sad?" "This is good news." He turned to face her and she saw the truth in his eyes. "It is good news. The best news. You're free now, really free. You can go anywhere, do anything. Find your people if they're out there. Or start fresh somewhere new. Somewhere without people like Dutch making your life difficult." "You think I will leave," Nalin said, understanding. "I think you should have the choice," James replied. "I never wanted you to stay because you felt trapped or obligated. If you choose to stay now, it means something different. It means you want to be here." Nalin walked closer to him. "James McAllister, you are a strange man. You pay a fortune for me, treat me with kindness, stand against the whole town to protect me, and now you are sad because I am free." "I'm not sad you're free," James said quietly. "I'm sad that I might lose the best partner I've ever had, the only real friend I've made since Catherine died. But your freedom is more important than my feelings." Nalin felt her eyes well up with tears, something that still surprised her when it happened. "For months I dreamed of freedom. I thought it meant running away, finding my people, going back to the way things were. But my people are scattered or dead. The way things were is gone forever. I cannot bring it back no matter how far I run." She took a deep breath. "But here I have found something different. Not a replacement for what I lost, but something new. Purpose. Respect. People who see me as a person, not as Apache or captive or anything else. Just me." James waited, hardly breathing. "So yes, I choose to stay," Nalin continued. "Not because I am trapped. Not because I owe you anything. But because this place has become my home. You have become my family, and I do not want to lose that." The relief on James's face was clear. "You're sure? There's a whole world out there. You could—" "I'm sure," Nalin interrupted. "But now we do things differently. Before I worked here because I had no choice. Now I work here because I choose to. We are partners, equals. You said that before, and now it is truly real." James extended his hand and they shook on it just as they had months ago. But this time it meant something even deeper. Over the next few weeks, word spread about Nalin's freedom papers. The reactions in town were mixed. Some people were angry, seeing it as another example of their traditional order being challenged. But others, particularly in the Mexican and immigrant communities, saw it as a sign of hope. If an Apache woman could earn her freedom and respect, maybe there was room in this territory for all kinds of people. Rosa brought news one evening that several other Mexican families had approached the judge about unfair labor contracts they had been forced into. The judge was reviewing those cases too, inspired by his decision about Nalin. "You are starting something," Rosa told Nalin with a smile. "Something bigger than just yourself. You are showing people that change is possible." But change always came with resistance. A year had passed since that day at the auction. The ranch had grown beyond what James had ever imagined. Word of their success spread far beyond Socorro, and buyers came from across the territory and beyond to purchase horses trained by the legendary partnership of McAllister and Nayland. The barn had been expanded. 2 new corrals had been built. They now employed 5 ranch hands, including 2 young Mexican men who had heard about the ranch where a man and an Apache woman worked as equals and wanted to see it for themselves. Rosa still came by regularly, now bringing her whole family. Her son had recovered from his illness and often helped around the ranch. She and Nalin had become like sisters, sharing stories and laughter over meals. Senora Lucia had taken to teaching Nalin the traditional healing methods she knew, seeing the younger woman as someone who could carry on that knowledge. In return, Nalin taught her the Apache ways of working with horses and understanding the land. But the biggest change was in the town itself. The stand at the ranch had sparked something. Other people began questioning the way things had always been done. More families stood up to Dutch's intimidation. The judge, emboldened by the support he received for his decision about Nalin, began issuing other rulings that favored fairness over tradition. It wasn't a revolution. Many people still clung to their old prejudices, but there were cracks in the wall now, small openings where light could get through. Dutch Hendricks had grown more isolated. His attempts to destroy James's ranch had backfired, making Dutch look petty and cruel. Some of his own workers had quit, tired of being used for his vendettas. His influence was waning slowly but surely. One morning in early autumn, a stranger rode up to the ranch. He was Apache, an older man with weathered features and traditional dress. Tom came to get James and Nalin immediately. When Nalin saw the man, she froze. Then she ran toward him, calling out in Apache. The man dismounted and embraced her, both of them speaking rapidly in their language. James watched from a distance, giving them privacy. After several minutes, Nalin brought the man over. "James, this is Swift Arrow. He is from my mother's band. He survived the attack on our village." Her voice shook with emotion. "There are others. Not many, but some. They are trying to make a life on reservation land to the east." Swift Arrow spoke in Apache and Nalin translated. "He says he has been looking for me for many months. Someone in town told him about an Apache woman who lived at a ranch nearby. He came to see if it was me. They talked for hours. Swift Arrow told her about the survivors, about the difficult life on the reservation, about how they were trying to hold on to their ways while adapting to a world that had changed forever. He told her about people she had known, who had lived and who had died. When Swift Arrow finally prepared to leave, he said something directly to Nalin. She listened, then shook her head, responding firmly. He nodded, seeming to understand, then clasped her shoulder one more time before mounting his horse. After he rode away, James approached Nalin cautiously. "What did he say at the end?" Nalin was quiet for a moment. "He said I should come with him, that I belong with my people, not here with white men, that this life I am living is not the Apache way." James felt his heart sink. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him that I am Apache and I always will be. That cannot be taken from me by where I live or who I work with. But I also told him that I have found a new life here, a good life, that I have a home and people who respect me, that I choose to stay." She looked at James directly. "I also told him that if he or the others ever need help, they can come here, that this ranch will always welcome Apache people who need aid or shelter. I hope that is acceptable to you." James smiled, relief and pride mixing in his expression. "This is your ranch as much as mine. Of course they're welcome." Over the next few months, a few Apache people did come to the ranch. Some were just passing through, grateful for a meal and a safe place to rest. Others stayed longer, learning about the horse training methods that combined Apache and frontier techniques. Nalin taught them, sharing knowledge that bridged two worlds. The presence of Apache visitors caused some grumbling in town, but by now, the ranch had too many defenders for anyone to challenge it openly. Besides, the Apache who came were always peaceful, always respectful, and they helped with ranch work in exchange for hospitality. One day, a family arrived at the ranch in desperate condition. The father had been injured in an accident. The mother was sick and their two children looked half-starved. They were Mexican, fleeing from one of Dutch's properties where they had been worked nearly to death. Without hesitation, Nalin and James took them in. Rosa's family helped nurse them back to health. When the father recovered, James offered him a job as a ranch hand with fair wages and decent treatment. The man cried, saying he had never expected such kindness after what his family had endured. Stories like this spread. The ranch became known as a place where fairness mattered more than the color of your skin or where you came from. It wasn't perfect. Problems still arose, misunderstandings still happened. But there was a foundation of respect that made working through those problems possible. In the spring of the second year, Tom came to James with unexpected news. "Boss, you're not going to believe this. Dutch is selling out. He's had enough. He's moving to California. Says he can't stand this territory anymore." James and Nalin exchanged stunned glances. Dutch, the man who had seemed so powerful, so untouchable, was giving up and leaving. "Good riddance," Tom added. "Maybe now this town can finally move forward without him holding everyone back." At the general store a few days later, James ran into the judge. The older man pulled him aside. "McAllister, I wanted you to know something. Your stand last year, it changed things around here. Not just for you and Nalin, but for a lot of people. You showed that it's possible to do the right thing even when it's hard. That matters more than you might realize." As they walked back to the ranch that evening, Nolan spoke thoughtfully. A year ago, I stood on a platform and people laughed at me. They saw me as broken, worthless, less than human. Now I own land. I have friends. I have purpose. Sometimes I cannot believe this is real. It's real, James assured her. You made it real by refusing to give up, by working hard, by being who you are without apology. We made it real, Nolan corrected. I could not have done this alone. You gave me the chance. Rosa and Senora Lucia gave me support. Tom and the others gave me respect. Even the judge and the people who stood with us that day, they all played a part. She stopped walking and looked out over the ranch, at the horses grazing in the pastures, at the buildings they had built and expanded, at the land that was now legally hers as much as James's. My people have a saying, she continued. We are all connected like threads in a blanket. When one thread is pulled out or broken, it weakens the whole. But when the threads hold together, the blanket is strong enough to protect everyone. This ranch, these people, we are like that blanket now. Different threads, different colors, but woven together into something strong. James thought about Catherine and Lily, about the family he had lost. He thought about the dark time after their deaths when he had felt so alone, so purposeless. Then he thought about the day at the auction when he had made a choice that everyone said was crazy. You know what? He said. Paying that $100 was the best investment I ever made. Not because of what it bought, but because of what it started. You've made me a better man, Nolan. You've reminded me what my wife always knew, that people matter more than money or comfort or fitting in. That evening, the ranch hosted a gathering. It had become a tradition, a monthly meal where everyone who worked at the ranch, plus Rosa's family, Senora Lucia, and various friends from town would come together to share food and stories. It was a strange sight in 1870 New Mexico. Apache, Mexican, white, all sitting together at the same table. Some spoke English, some spoke Spanish, some spoke Apache. Everyone helped translate for everyone else, and somehow it worked. Children played together without caring about differences their parents had been taught to fear. Young people heard stories from different cultures and realized that bravery, love, loss, and hope were universal. Old prejudices weakened in the face of actual human connection. As the evening wound down and people began to head home, Tom pulled James aside. Boss, I've been thinking. I'm getting old, and I've saved up a bit of money. I was thinking maybe I could buy a small piece of land nearby, start my own little place, stay close enough to help out here when you need me. That's a great idea, Tom, James said. Actually, there's that plot to the south that I own but never use. What if we worked out a deal? You could have it for a fair price, build your place there. We'd be neighbors, Tom's eyes lit up. You'd do that? You've been more than just a ranch hand, Tom. You've been a friend, almost family. Besides, having you nearby would be good for everyone. As Tom walked away planning his future, Nolan came to stand beside James. You are giving away land now? Sharing it, James corrected. There's enough land for everyone if people would stop trying to hoard it all. They stood together watching the last visitors leave, watching the stars come out over their ranch. So much had changed in 2 years. So much pain had transformed into purpose. So much hatred had been answered.